I controlled everything, until an accident stole my son. But in the silence of his room, a hidden microphone revealed a truth more horrifying than his death. The silence in my mansion was a physical entity, a pressure against the eardrums that cost me millions a year to maintain. It was the sound of absolute control. From my study, a room more akin to a NORAD command center than a billionaire's office, I could see and hear everything. Every polished corridor, every manicured garden, every whisper between the staff was fed into a network of hidden cameras and microphones, so sophisticated they were probably illegal in 12 different countries. I called it the Vance Panopticon. My security chief called it paranoia. I called it being a father. My son, Leo, was my world. And my world had been shattered 3 years ago on a rain-slicked stretch of highway. The accident that stole my wife, Eleanor, had also stolen Leo's future. It left him paralyzed from the neck down, trapped inside a body that refused to obey him, his brilliant mind locked behind eyes that could only track, blink, and weep. He was 18 now, a young man imprisoned in a gilded cage, and I was his warden, his protector, his everything. I had built this fortress of technology around him, because the world had already proven how easily it could break him. I would not allow it to happen again. The staff were vetted to an obsessive degree. Background checks that delved into their kindergarten report cards, psychological evaluations, lie detector tests. They were the best of the best, professional and discreet. Among them was Elara, Leo's primary caregiver and maid. She had been with us for 2 years, a quiet woman in her late 30s, with gentle hands and a voice as soft as cashmere. She was efficient, almost invisible, performing her duties with a serene competence that had, over time, chipped away at my fortress of suspicion. She spoke to Leo not as a patient, but as a person. She'd read him novels, described the changing seasons outside his window, and sometimes, when she thought no one was listening, she would hum old folk songs while she cleaned his room. I was in my study, a half-empty coffee cup growing cold beside me, as I reviewed quarterly earnings reports from my Asian division. The audio from Leo's suite was playing softly through a dedicated speaker, a constant, reassuring hum in the background of my life. Usually it was just the rustle of sheets, the rhythmic beep of his monitors, the quiet turning of a page as Elara read to him. But today the sound was different. I heard the door to his room click shut, a softer sound than usual. Elara was not alone. I zoomed in on the audio feed, filtering out the ambient noise. It was Marco, one of the junior gardeners, a young man I'd barely noticed, good with hydrangeas and always kept his head down. What was he doing in Leo's room? Is everything ready for tonight? Marco's voice was a nervous whisper, thick with an accent I couldn't quite place. My fingers paused over the keyboard. I leaned closer to the speaker, my heart giving a sudden, heavy thud against my ribs. Almost, Elara's voice was low, conspiratorial, stripped of its usual warmth. It was steel. The van is parked on the service road a block away, just like we planned, the side without cameras. No one will see it when we load him in. Load him in? A cold dread, slick and oily, began to seep into my veins. The figures on my screen blurred. I switched my monitor to the live feed from Leo's room. The camera was hidden in a smoke detector, giving me a clear view from above. Elara and Marco were standing near the window, their backs to Leo's bed. They thought they were in a blind spot. They were wrong. "What about the father? Mr. Vance?" Marco asked, wringing his hands. "His security. It's insane. If he finds out—" "He won't," Elara cut him off, her tone sharp, absolute. "He has his global board meeting call tonight, 9 p.m. sharp. It's the one time he is completely locked in, undistracted. It lasts for 3 hours. It's our only window. I've timed it for months. The night staff shift change is at 10. For 15 minutes, the West Wing is practically empty." My blood ran cold. She had studied my routine, my most private, high-security routine. She knew my schedule better than my own executive assistant. This wasn't a random, opportunistic crime. This was a meticulously planned operation. "And the boy?" Marco's voice cracked. "Are you sure you can manage him alone? He's a dead weight, Elara." I watched her on the screen. She turned her head slightly, her profile outlined against the afternoon light pouring through the window. A faint, unreadable expression crossed her face. For a moment I prayed I was mishearing, that this was some bizarre misunderstanding. A surprise party? A secret medical transport I wasn't aware of? My mind scrambled for any rational explanation, anything other than the horrifying truth that was taking shape. Then Alara spoke again, and her words shattered every last hope. "He won't fight back," she said, her voice chillingly practical. "He can't. That's the point. Once he's in the van and we're clear of the city, we'll be safe. It has to be tonight, Marco. After tonight, we'll never get another chance." The ceramic coffee cup slipped from my numb fingers. It hit the marble floor with a sharp crack, but I didn't hear it. The only sound in the world was the echo of her words in my ears. The woman I had trusted with my son's life, the woman who sang him lullabies, was planning to abduct him. She was going to load him into a van like a piece of cargo and disappear into the night. My breath hitched in my chest, my muscles locked, and a single, paralyzing thought consumed me. They were going to take my son, and I had just hours to figure out how to stop them without them ever knowing I was listening. I stared at the screen, at the two people finalizing their plan to destroy my entire world, and for the first time since the accident, I was completely and utterly frozen in terror. The paralysis lasted for precisely 12 seconds. I know because the chronometer on my Patek Philippe was ticking in the suffocating silence of my study. Then the terror didn't recede. It crystallized. The ice in my veins didn't melt. It sharpened into 1,000 tiny daggers of pure, cold rage. They weren't just planning to take my son. They were treating him like an object, a piece of furniture to be loaded into a van. A dead weight, the gardener had called him. My son. My brilliant, beautiful boy. I reached for the secure line, my hand steady, my mind a storm of chillingly calm calculations. I didn't call the police. That would be messy, public. It would mean losing control, and I hadn't built an empire by losing control. My finger pressed a single speed dial button. 3 rings, then a gravelly voice answered with a single word. Arthur. Arthur was my head of security, a former Mossad agent who saw the world in terms of threats and countermeasures. He was the only person on Earth, apart from me, who knew the full extent of the Vance Panopticon. "Code Black," I said, my voice low and even. "Active internal threat. Alara and a gardener, Marco. They're planning to abduct Leo tonight." I relayed the details I'd overheard, the time, the van, the service road, with detached precision, as if I were dictating a hostile takeover strategy. "I want a ghost team, unmarked vehicles, civilian clothes. I want a tracker on that van, something they'll never find. I want eyes on them from the moment they leave the grounds. No one engages. No one intervenes. Not until I give the word. Is that clear?" "Crystal, Mr. Vance," Arthur replied, his voice devoid of surprise. He was already in motion. I could hear it. "What's the motive? A ransom?" "I don't know," I admitted, and the not knowing was a fresh stab of fear. "It doesn't make sense. Alara passed every background check. Her financials are clean. No gambling debts, no sick relatives, nothing. This feels wrong. A simple kidnapping for money had a playbook. You pay the ransom, you get your son back. This felt different, more personal, more dangerous. Dig deeper, Arthur. I want to know who Marco is talking to, who Alara has called every day for the past year. I want to know the name of her childhood pet. I want to know everything." I spent the next few hours in a state of hyper-awareness. To the outside world, I was Alexander Vance, titan of industry, preparing for a pivotal board meeting. Inside, I was a predator, waiting for the trap to spring. At 6 p.m., as she did every evening, Alara appeared at the door of my study. "Mr. Vance," she said softly, her eyes downcast, "Leo is ready for his dinner. I was wondering if you'd like to join him tonight." My entire body tensed. I looked up from my desk, schooling my features into a mask of weary preoccupation. I met her gaze. Her eyes were the same clear, compassionate gray they had always been. There was no flicker of deceit, no hint of the venomous plot she was hatching. She was a phenomenal actress, or a sociopath. "Thank you, Alara, but I can't," I said, my voice perfectly level. The Tokyo board is waiting. It's going to be a long night. I watched for any sign of relief, any tightening around her mouth. Nothing. She was flawless. Of course, sir, she nodded. I'll make sure he's comfortable. I know you will, I said, and the words tasted like acid. You always do. As she turned to leave, a wave of revulsion washed over me. This woman had touched my son, cared for his most intimate needs, earned his silent trust. The betrayal was so profound it was almost physical, a pressure building behind my eyes. I let her walk away. For now. An hour before the abduction was set to begin, my secure line buzzed again. It was Arthur. Sir, we have something. We did a covert sweep of Ilara's quarters. It's not what we expected. What is it? I demanded, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. No ransom notes, no weapons, no burner phones, Arthur said. We found a folder hidden under a floorboard. It's full of medical documents, scans, patient histories, doctor's notes. A sliver of confusion pierced my anger. Was she trying to sell his medical data? It was valuable, but not worth this level of risk. But here's the thing, sir, Arthur continued, his voice tight. The files aren't about Leo. What? They're heavily encrypted, but my tech guy managed to crack the main patient ID page on one of them. The name on the file? It's Ilara's. And the diagnosis is the same as Leo's. Quadriplegia. Traumatic spinal cord injury at the C4 vertebra. Sir, according to this, Ilara should be paralyzed from the neck down. The world tilted on its axis. My meticulously constructed reality, built on data and observation, fractured like a dropped mirror. That's impossible, Arthur, I whispered, the words catching in my throat. I'm looking at her right now on screen. She's moving. She's walking. I switched the monitor to the camera in Leo's suite. There she was, Ilara, moving with that quiet grace of hers, adjusting Leo's pillows, her hands gentle and sure. A woman who, according to a document hidden under her floorboards, shouldn't be able to move a muscle below her chin. We ran the patient ID number. Arthur's voice was grim, pulling me back from the brink of disbelief. It's linked to a Dr. Aris Thorne, neuroscientist. He was a rising star a decade ago, published some groundbreaking papers on spinal cord regeneration. Then he went dark, dropped off the map completely. His research was deemed too radical, too unethical. Unethical. The word hung in the air of my sterile, silent office. I stared at Ilara on the screen, and for the first time I saw her not as a caregiver or a kidnapper, but as an impossibility. A medical miracle, or something far more sinister. What's the connection to Marco? I asked, my mind racing, trying to assemble the jagged pieces of this new puzzle. That's the other thing, sir, Arthur said. Marco isn't a gardener. His real name is Dr. Marco Bellini. He was Thorne's protege, his top research assistant. He disappeared from the academic world at the same time Thorne did. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't a kidnapping for ransom. This was something else entirely. They weren't after my money. They were after my son. Leo wasn't just a target. He was the prize. His condition, the very thing that had shattered our lives, was precisely what they wanted. They're not kidnappers, I said, the realization dawning on me with horrifying clarity. They're scientists. Body snatchers. The 9 p.m. board meeting was a surreal exercise in duplicity. I spoke about profit margins and market penetration, while a dedicated screen in the corner of my vision showed Ilara beginning her final preparations. She administered Leo's nightly medication, her movements calm and methodical. But I knew now what it was, a sedative, strong enough to ensure he would be completely compliant, unable to even blink a protest. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild animal trapped in a cage of corporate etiquette. At 9:45, she looked directly at the smoke detector at my camera. My breath caught. Did she know? Had this whole thing been a setup? But her expression was blank. She simply reached up and disconnected it. The screen went black. A second later, Arthur's voice was in my ear through a hidden comms device. She cut the primary camera, sir. We're on backup audio and the thermal hidden in the vent. My main screen flickered to life, showing a ghostly heat signature image of the room. 2 figures, one large and still on the bed, the other smaller, moving towards the door. The door opened, and a third heat signature entered. Marco. It was time. Team is in position, Arthur reported coolly. Tracker is active on the van. They're moving him now. I watched the thermal blips on the screen as they transferred my son from his bed to a specialized gurney they must have smuggled in. The two figures moved with practiced efficiency, their actions precise and coordinated. They were professionals. They exited the room, and I watched their heat signatures move down the corridor, heading for the West Wing service exit. "Excuse me, gentlemen," I interrupted the CFO's drone about third-quarter projections. "A pressing matter requires my immediate attention. I'll have to rejoin you shortly." I cut the connection without waiting for a reply. In an instant I was on my feet, striding out of the study and down the grand staircase, my shoes silent on the thick Persian runner. The mansion was quiet, the night staff not yet at their posts, just as Alara had predicted. I reached the West Wing just in time to see the service door swinging shut. Outside, the cool night air hit me. Through the manicured hedges I could see the service road. A dark, unmarked panel van was idling, its lights off. I saw them, two shadowy figures lifting my son, wrapped in blankets like a piece of contraband, into the back of the vehicle. The van's doors slid shut with a soft final thud. My comms crackled. "They're moving, sir. We have them." "Stay back," I commanded, my voice a low growl. "Let them think they're clear." I watched the van's taillights disappear around a bend in the road. I knew where they were going. Arthur's team had already decrypted the location data from a GPS chip hidden in Alara's shoe. An abandoned medical facility on the outskirts of the city. Dr. Thorne's old forgotten lab. "Get me a live feed from the drone," I ordered, climbing into the driver's seat of my own car, a matte black Aston Martin that was anything but inconspicuous. "And patch me through to Alara's phone, audio only." A moment later, the phone in the van began to ring. I imagined her surprise, her confusion. After 3 rings, she answered, her voice tight with alarm. "Who is this?" "This is Alexander Vance," I said, my voice as cold and hard as the engine I had just ignited. "You have something that belongs to me. You and Dr. Bellini are going to turn that van around right now and bring my son back. If you do, I might let you live." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end, followed by a tense silence. I could hear the hum of the van's engine, the whisper of Marco's panicked voice in the background. Then Alara spoke, and her voice was no longer the soft tone of a caregiver or the clipped voice of a kidnapper. It was the voice of a true believer, filled with a chilling, unwavering conviction. "I'm afraid that's not possible, Mr. Vance," she said. "You don't understand. We're not kidnapping your son. We're saving him." Saving him? The words were so absurd, so utterly disconnected from the reality of the situation, my son being spirited away in a dark van, that for a second I could only manage a cold, humorless laugh. Saving him from what, Alara? From his home? From the best medical care money can buy? From a father who would burn down the world to protect him? "We're saving him from the cage you built for him, Mr. Vance," she replied, her voice steady over the line, without a trace of fear. There was an unnerving pity in her tone, as if I were the one who was trapped. "The most expensive, comfortable prison in the world. You're not protecting him. You're preserving him. There's a difference." The line went dead. The sheer, unmitigated gall of her words fueled the cold fire in my gut. I floored the accelerator, the Aston Martin's engine roaring in the night. On the holographic display projected onto my windshield, I watched the drone's infrared feed track the van as it snaked through the industrial outskirts of the city. They were fast, but I was faster. Arthur's team was a silent, menacing shadow a few miles behind them, a net ready to be drawn tight on my command. The abandoned facility was a brutalist concrete monolith, a relic of a failed biotech startup from the 90s, surrounded by a rusted fence and overgrown weeds. The van pulled into a loading bay, the doors groaning open in protest. I parked my car in the shadows a quarter-mile away and switched to the micro-drones Arthur's team had already deployed. Tiny, insect-like machines that slipped through broken windows and ventilation shafts, feeding me a mosaic of live video feeds. I watched as they wheeled Leo into a cavernous, shockingly clean laboratory. Banks of servers hummed, monitors glowed with complex biological data, and in the center of the room was a gleaming white apparatus that looked like a cross between an MRI machine and something from a science fiction film. A third figure was waiting for them. He was older, with wild gray hair and eyes that burned with a manic intensity. Dr. Aris Thorne. I patched my audio into the lab's comm system. "The theatrics are impressive, Doctor," I said, my voice booming from speakers all around them, making all three of them jump. "But the show is over. The building is surrounded. You have nowhere to run." Thorne just smiled, a thin, unnerving expression. "Alexander Vance, a pleasure. I knew you'd be too smart for a simple police response. You want answers, don't you? A man like you can't stand a puzzle he can't solve." "I want my son," I growled. "Ilara, show him," Thorne commanded softly. Ilara nodded. She walked over to a terminal and typed a command. A large screen on the wall flickered to life, displaying a 3D rendering of a human nervous system. Then a video feed appeared next to it. It showed a woman in a hospital bed, motionless, identical to Leo in her paralysis. It was Ilara, 2 years ago. The video was time-stamped, dated. Then another video played, showing her first flicker of movement in a finger, then a hand, then an arm. It documented a painstaking, miraculous recovery. "It's not regeneration, Mr. Vance," Thorne said, his voice ringing with the passion of a zealot. "That's a child's dream. This is a transfer. We can't fix the broken hardware, so we migrate the software. A full synaptic and cognitive mapping. We created a synthetic neural interface, nanites that can bridge the gap between organic and synthetic." He gestured to Ilara. "Her body isn't healed. It's piloted by a network more complex than the one in your office. The medical files, her impossible recovery. It all clicked into place. She was his success story, his proof of concept." "And now you want to use my son as your next lab rat," I seethed. "No." Ilara stepped forward, her eyes pleading. "Leo, he asked for this. He chose this." I laughed again, a harsh, broken sound. "He can't speak, you delusional woman. He can't move. He can't choose anything. You gave him the best technology in the world to track his eyes, but did you ever bother to read what he was saying?" she shot back, her voice cracking. "Or were you too busy watching him to ever truly see him?" She turned and pointed to Leo's gurney. Next to his head was the eye-tracking computer from his room, the one he used to select letters on a screen. Marco turned the monitor towards my hidden drone's camera. On the screen, a sentence was painstakingly spelled out, glowing in the dark of the lab. It wasn't a cry for help. It wasn't a plea to be rescued. It was a single, clear, heartbreaking message he must have been writing for hours, a message he knew only Ilara would read. "Let me go, Dad. Please. I want to live." The world dissolved into a silent roar in my ears. The panopticon, the bodyguards, the sterile mansion, all of it. A prison. The silence I had so carefully cultivated wasn't for his peace. It was for mine. I had been so obsessed with preventing his death that I had never stopped to consider that he had already stopped living. Ilara hadn't been whispering conspiracies to him. She had been listening. She had been giving him the one thing my billions couldn't, a choice. My rage collapsed, replaced by a chasm of grief so profound it stole the air from my lungs. I looked at the image of my son, a brilliant mind trapped in a silent scream, and I finally understood. "Arthur," I said into my comms, my voice raw, unrecognizable. "Stand down, secure the perimeter, but no one goes in. No one." I walked out of the shadows and towards the lab, unarmed, alone. I entered the loading bay, my footsteps echoing in the vast space. Thorne, Ilara, and Marco watched me, frozen. I didn't look at them. I walked directly to my son's side, my gaze fixed on the words on the screen. I reached out and my hand hovered over his hair, afraid to touch him, afraid of the stranger I had let him become. "Is it safe?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, addressing the doctor but looking at my son. Thorne was taken aback. "There are risks, of course. But the prototype—" He gestured to a covered shape in the corner of the room. It was humanoid. "Is ready. We can give him back his life, Mr. Vance. A different life, but a life." I looked from the sterile white prototype to my son's eyes, which were locked on mine, filled with a desperate, silent hope. In that moment, all my control, all my power, meant nothing. The only thing that mattered was the choice of the boy in the bed. He didn't need a warden, he needed a father. "You have a new backer, Doctor," I said, turning to face Thorne, my voice regaining its iron certainty, but forged into something new. "This lab now belongs to me. This project is now under my control. You will have unlimited funding, the best minds in the world, and facilities that make this place look like a garage. You will answer to me, and we will not proceed until the risk is as close to zero as humanly possible." I then looked at Ilara, a flicker of gratitude warring with the sting of her betrayal. "You will be in charge of his transition team. You're the only one who listened." My empire wasn't built to be a prison. It was time I started using it to build a future. My son's future. Whatever that may look like. It wasn't the resolution I had stormed in here to get, but as I finally took my son's hand in mine, feeling the faint, unresponsive warmth of his skin, I knew it was the only one that truly mattered. The war for control was over. The fight for his life was just beginning. They say control is an illusion. I spent my life, and billions of dollars, proving that statement wrong. I built an empire from the ground up, an empire of concrete and data, where every variable was accounted for, every risk managed. My world was a fortress of order, and I was its king. But that was before the accident, before the rain-slicked asphalt and the sickening crunch of metal, before the world I had so meticulously built was shattered in a single, irreversible moment. The doctors used words like catastrophic and non-responsive. They spoke of my son, Leo, in the past tense. My brilliant, vibrant Leo, who was supposed to take over the world, was now confined to a state-of-the-art bed in a wing of my mansion that I'd converted into a private ICU. He was there, breathing, his heart beating a steady, mocking rhythm. But he was gone, trapped somewhere behind unblinking eyes that stared at a ceiling he couldn't see. I refused to accept it. I fired the doctors who spoke of palliative care and hired the ones who spoke of potential breakthroughs. I poured millions into experimental treatments and cutting-edge technology. My home, once a symbol of success, became a gilded cage, a sterile, silent mausoleum for a life that was still technically being lived. The silence was the worst part. It was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothered all hope. That's why I installed the microphones. To my staff, it was a security upgrade. State-of-the-art, enterprise-level surveillance. But it was a lie. I didn't care about intruders. The real reason was pathetic. A desperate prayer from an atheist. I had the audio feeds from Leo's room piped directly into my study. I would sit there for hours, late into the night, amidst the glow of my stock tickers, and I would just listen. I listened for a sigh, a mumble, any sound, any flicker of the boy I'd lost to prove he was still in there. All I ever heard was the rhythmic puff of the ventilator and the rustle of a nurse's scrubs. Then we hired Elena. She was different from the rotation of stern, clinical nurses. She was a caregiver, a maid assigned specifically to Leo's wing. Younger, with kind eyes and a quiet disposition that seemed to absorb the oppressive silence of the house rather than fight it. I was suspicious, of course. I vetted her background 6 ways from Sunday. She was clean, a poor immigrant from a small, unnamed village, working to send money back home. Unlike the nurses, who treated Leo like a delicate piece of machinery, Elena treated him like a person. She would talk to him while she dusted, telling him about her day, about the birds she saw outside his window. She'd read to him, not from medical journals, but from worn paperbacks with fantastical covers. I watched her on the silent video feeds, my heart a knot of cynicism and a desperate, flickering hope. Was this kindness genuine, or was it a long con? Was she trying to ingratiate herself, to find a way into my fortune through my son's tragedy? Tonight, like every night, I was in my leather throne, the room dark save for the monitors. The markets in Tokyo were opening, but I wasn't watching them. I was listening to the feed from Leo's room. I heard the soft click of the door and knew it was Elena, starting her evening duties. I heard the gentle swoosh of her duster, the soft murmur of her voice as she told Leo about a funny dog she'd seen in the park. It was routine, comforting, in a tragic sort of way. Then her voice stopped. I heard a faint vibration. Her phone. I saw her on the monitor, glancing at the door before answering. She turned away from the camera, her back to the main microphone in the ceiling, and began to speak in a hushed, urgent tone. It wasn't English, it was her native language, a rapid, fluid tongue I didn't understand. My fingers flew across a keyboard, activating the more sensitive directional mic hidden in the headboard of Leo's bed. I rerouted the audio through my translation software. The program took a moment to calibrate, then stark, white words began to scroll across one of my screens. Her voice was a whisper, but the microphone picked up every syllable, every drop of poison. "Yes, everything is in place," she murmured into the phone. The words appeared on my screen, cold and clinical. "I've been watching him. The timing has to be perfect." My grip on the mouse tightened. Watching who? My son. "No, there can be no mistakes," the translation continued. "The family trusts me completely. They have no idea." A cold dread began to seep into my bones, colder than any stock market crash. What did she mean? "Don't worry about the noise," she whispered, and my blood ran cold. "With what I'm going to use, he won't feel a thing. It will be quiet. Peaceful even." My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Stealing something. Jewelry. Art. But what wouldn't he feel? Then came the final sentence, the one that stopped my heart, the one that turned the world to ice. The words glowed on my screen, a digital death sentence written in a language I didn't speak, but now understood with horrifying clarity. "By sunrise," she said, her voice dropping to a near inaudible whisper. "It will all be over. It's the only way to finally set him free." My breath caught in my throat. My meticulously controlled world fractured, the charts, the data, the billions in my accounts. They all meant nothing. In the throne room of my own empire, surrounded by the technology I'd used to command my world, I could do nothing but stare at the words on the screen and freeze. The ice in my veins shattered into a million shards of pure, unadulterated rage. The paralysis lasted only a moment, replaced by a cold, familiar clarity. This was a hostile takeover, not of a company, but of my son's life, and I, the master of control, would handle it myself. My first instinct was to hit the silent alarm, to have my security team swarm the wing and drag her out. But no, that was messy. It would create panic, and she might do something desperate. More importantly, it wouldn't give me the one thing I craved more than anything. Answers. Who was she talking to? Who were they? My fingers, steady as a surgeon's, moved across the keyboard. While one program continued to monitor the audio, another began tracing the origin of her phone call. A third program cross-referenced her employee file, the one I thought was so thoroughly vetted with every intelligence database I had access to. Red flags, connections, aliases. I wanted to know who this woman, this LNA, truly was. On the video monitor, she had finished her call. She tucked her phone away and turned back to Leo. Her face, now visible, showed no signs of malice. There was no cruel smirk, no flicker of darkness. She looked exactly as she always did, serene, gentle. She picked up a damp cloth and began to tenderly wipe Leo's forehead. The sight was so incongruous with the words I'd just heard that it made my stomach churn. She was a monster wearing the mask of a saint. The trace on her call was taking too long, bouncing between burner phones and encrypted networks. Sunrise. I didn't have time. I had to go down there. I had to see her, to look in her eyes and see the lie myself. I stood up, my movements silent and deliberate. I bypassed the main house security system with a code on my watch, ensuring no alarms would alert the staff to my movements. The cavernous halls of my mansion, usually a source of pride, felt like an enemy's territory, each shadow a potential accomplice. I reached the door to Leo's wing and paused, my hand on the cold brass handle. I could hear her soft voice from inside, reading from one of his books. It was a fantasy novel, something about dragons and forgotten magic. The sound was so normal, so peaceful, it was a violation. I pushed the door open. Elena looked up, her eyes wide with surprise, but not fear. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice soft. "I didn't expect to see you." She placed a bookmark in the novel and stood. "I couldn't sleep," I said, my voice a carefully constructed mask of weary grief. I walked over to Leo's bedside, avoiding her gaze, focusing only on my son. His face was placid, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of the machine. "Sometimes I just need to see him." "Of course," she said with a sympathy that now seemed utterly grotesque. "He's had a calm night." I needed to get her out of the room, just for a minute. My eyes scanned the space, landing on a cashmere blanket folded on a chair. "Could you do me a favor, Elena?" I asked, my voice low. "My wife, his mother, she always liked him to have the blue blanket from the main linen closet, the one in the West Wing. It feels foolish, but—" I let my voice trail off, playing the part of a heartbroken man clinging to meaningless rituals. Her expression softened. "It's not foolish at all, sir. I'll get it right away." She gave me a small, reassuring nod and slipped out of the room, her footsteps silent in the hallway. The moment the door clicked shut, I moved. My calm facade dissolved. I was a predator in my own son's cage. Where would she hide it? The poison, the needle, whatever her weapon was. I checked the medical cart first. All the vials and syringes were accounted for, locked in their cases. I ran my hands under the mattress, in the drawers of the bedside table. Nothing. Just medical supplies, clean linens. My eyes fell on the book she'd been reading, lying on the nightstand. It was an old, worn hardcover. It felt wrong, too personal a place. But I was running out of time. I snatched it up. It felt heavier than it should. I pried open the cover. The first few pages were normal. Then I saw it. The middle of the book had been hollowed out. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. But inside I didn't find a syringe or a vial of clear liquid. What I saw made no sense. It was a small, intricate device, no bigger than a credit card, bristling with micro-soldered wires and a small, unlabeled port. It looked like a prototype for something, a piece of technology I'd never seen before. It wasn't a weapon, it was something else. Tucked beside it was a folded sheet of paper. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. It wasn't a confession or a ransom note. It was a complex schematic, a wiring diagram filled with notations I didn't recognize. It seemed to map out the neural pathways of the human brainstem. Then, at the bottom of the diagram, scrawled in neat, handwritten English, were 5 words that blew my world apart for the second time that night. It read, "This bypasses the damage. He's still in there." I heard her footsteps approaching in the hall. My mind was reeling, trying to process the impossible. Bypass the damage. He's still in there. It wasn't a plan for murder. It was a rescue. A crazy, unsanctioned, terrifyingly advanced medical experiment. The phrase, "set him free," echoed in my head, no longer a threat of death, but a promise of resurrection. The door handle began to turn. I stood there, frozen once again, the device in one hand, the impossible blueprint in the other, and the woman who was either my son's savior or his executioner, about to walk back into the room. My mind, a machine trained for ruthless calculation, was failing. It couldn't reconcile the image of a kind-hearted maid with the author of a neural schematic that would make my own R&D department weep. The door swung open and Elena entered, the blue blanket folded neatly over her arm. Her eyes met mine, then flickered down to the hollowed-out book and the device in my hand. The placid mask dropped, not to reveal a killer, but something far more potent. A defiant, brilliant scientist caught in the act. The gentle maid was gone. In her place stood a woman with an intelligence that burned like a furnace. "Mr. Sterling," she said, and her voice had changed. The soft deference was gone, replaced by a crisp, level tone. "You weren't supposed to find that." I held up the device. "What is this?" The question was a low growl. My rage was gone, replaced by a dizzying cocktail of confusion, fear, and a terrifying, razor-thin sliver of hope. She didn't flinch. She placed the blanket on the chair and looked me straight in the eye. "It's called a neural shunt, a prototype. It creates a temporary bridge over the lesion in his brainstem. It won't heal him, but it would reconnect him. For a few minutes, maybe more. Long enough to communicate. Communicate." The word hung in the air, electric and impossible. I had spent a fortune trying to achieve what she was describing, with teams of the world's best neuroscientists, and they had all failed. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice raw. "My name is Dr. Elena Varga," she said, as if stating a simple fact. I was a lead researcher at the Zurich Institute for Neuroengineering. My work was considered radical, unethical. Funding was cut. My project was terminated. The pieces began to click into place with sickening speed. The call. The secretive plan. "The person on the phone," I pressed. "Who was that?" "My former mentor, Dr. Alistair Finch. He's the only one who believed in me. He helped me get the components for the shunt. We were planning to do this tonight, without your knowledge. You were going to perform an experimental, unsanctioned neuroprocedure on my son, in his bed, without my consent. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. It was reckless. It was insane. It was also the first glimmer of genuine hope I'd felt in over a year. "Your doctors have given up, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice laced with a passion that bordered on fury. "They file their reports, they collect their exorbitant fees, and they wait for him to die. They see a damaged brain. I see a prisoner. The noise I mentioned on the phone. It's the background electrical chatter of his brain. This device filters it, amplifies the coherent cognitive signals. It lets his consciousness speak through the static." "Set him free," I whispered, the words tasting completely different now. "Yes," she affirmed. "Not to kill him. To free his mind from its cage, even for a moment. To let him tell you he's still here." I stared at the device in my hand. It was so small, so deceptively simple. Billions of dollars in medical technology surrounded us, all of it useless. And this woman, this disgraced genius masquerading as a maid, was holding the key. My analytical mind, my lifetime of managing risk, screamed at me. This could kill him. A power surge, a miscalculation. It could extinguish the faint spark that remained. But my heart, the long-dormant heart of a father, was screaming something else entirely. "Why?" I asked, the question barely a whisper. "Why risk everything? Your career, prison? Why for my son?" A flicker of emotion crossed her face then, something deep and painful. "Because 5 years ago my younger brother was in an accident. Same injury. The doctors told us the same things they told you. They told us to let him go. I believed them." Her voice cracked just for a second. "I wasn't a doctor then. I was just a sister, and I let them unplug the machine. I've spent every day since wondering if he was still in there, screaming for me to help." The silence in the room returned, but it was different now. It wasn't empty. It was filled with the weight of her grief and my impossible decision. Sunrise was approaching. Time was running out. She believed this would work. She had risked everything on that belief. And now, the choice was mine. Trust the institutions, the experts, the men in white coats who had told me to prepare for a funeral. Or trust this desperate, brilliant, possibly unhinged woman who was offering a miracle? I looked from the device to my son's face. For the first time in months, I wasn't just looking at a medical case. I was looking for Leo, my son, the boy who loved bad sci-fi movies and could debate philosophy for hours. Was he in there? Was he listening to us right now? "Okay," I said, the word feeling like a leap from a cliff in the dark. Elena's eyes widened. Show me what you were going to do." For the next hour she worked with a focused intensity that was mesmerizing. She laid out a small kit of tools with surgical precision. She explained the schematic, pointing to the exact cluster of nerves at the base of his skull where the shunt's microfilaments would need to be placed. It was non-invasive, she explained, adhering to the skin and using a low-frequency magnetic field to interface with his neural pathways. The device itself would connect to her phone, which would run the complex algorithm to translate his neural signals into text. "It's ready," she finally said, her forehead beaded with sweat. She held the small device, the filaments looking like a spider's web of silver. "This is the point of no return. Once I activate it, the feedback loop begins. It will either work or it could cause a cascade failure, a seizure that he might not recover from. The final choice, the ultimate risk." I looked at the morning light beginning to creep through the curtains. Sunrise. I thought of the silence, the endless, soul-crushing silence of the last year. Any answer was better than this, even the worst one. "Do it," I commanded. With a deep breath, she leaned over Leo. Her hands were impossibly steady as she affixed the device to the base of his neck. She connected a single wire to her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. "Activating," she whispered. A soft green light glowed on the device. My eyes were glued to her phone's screen. For a few seconds there was nothing but a chaotic jumble of symbols and code, the raw data of his brain. It was meaningless noise, just as she'd said. My heart sank. It was a failure, a crazy dream. Then, a single, coherent letter appeared on the screen. D. It flickered, then vanished. My breath hitched. Elena's eyes were wide, her knuckles white as she gripped the phone. Another letter appeared. A, then another. D, D, A, D. My world stopped spinning. It wasn't noise, it was him. He was talking. Tears streamed down my face, hot and unchecked. He was there. He was real. Elena was crying too, silent tears of vindication and relief. More letters began to form, slowly, painstakingly, as if being pulled from a vast, deep ocean. D, A, D, D, O, N, T, T, R, U, S, T. My elation froze, turning to a shard of ice in my gut. Don't trust. Don't trust who? The doctors? Me? The letters kept coming, forming a name I knew all too well, a name that made no sense in this context. It was the name of my most loyal employee, my right-hand man for over 20 years, the man I trusted with my life, my company, and my family. The final letter appeared, completing the message on the screen. Dad, don't trust, Robert. The name on the screen burned into my retinas. Robert, my COO, the man who'd been my shadow since the beginning, who I considered a brother, the man who had been managing the family trust, Leo's trust, since the accident. The message was a ghost's warning, a digital whisper from a locked room, and it shattered the foundation of my world more completely than the crash ever had. I looked at Elena, whose face was a mask of confusion. The name meant nothing to her. To me, it meant everything. Suddenly, the green light on the shunt began to flicker erratically. "The connection is destabilizing," Elena said, her voice tight with alarm. "His neural energy is spiking, the shock of communicating. It's too much." "Keep it open," I commanded, my voice hoarse. "Leo, what does he have to do with this?" The letters on the screen devolved into a chaotic stream of data. The signal was lost. Leo's face remained impassive, but I knew he was in there, fighting to tell me more. The ventilator puffed its steady rhythm, a sound that was no longer a death knell but the ticking of a clock. "I can't hold it," Elena said, her thumb swiping at the screen. "I have to shut it down before it hurts him." She deactivated the shunt. The soft green light died. The silence that rushed back in was heavier than before, filled with the echo of my son's voice. I turned away from the bed, my mind a storm of betrayal and cold, hard logic. Robert. The accident had happened on a winding country road. Leo had been driving back from a weekend retreat. He was a safe, cautious driver. The police report had been straightforward. Wet road, loss of control, an accident. But what if it wasn't? Robert knew Leo's schedule. He had access to his cars. He managed the 9-figure trust that Leo would inherit, a trust Robert would continue to manage, collecting a hefty percentage as long as Leo remained incapacitated. If Leo died, it would be divided among charities. But in this state, this living death, Robert held the purse strings. "I need to make a call," I said to Eleanor, my voice like steel. I strode back to my study, the fortress from which I had controlled my empire, and realized it had been breached from the inside long ago. I didn't call security. I didn't call the police. I called Robert. "It's early," he answered, his voice thick with feigned sleep. "Everything all right?" "I need you here, Robert." "Now," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. "There's been a development with Leo." While I waited, Eleanor and I sat in silence in Leo's room. I explained who Robert was. I saw the understanding dawn on her face. She wasn't a maid, and I was no longer just a grieving father. We were allies, conspirators in a truth that had been buried in my son's silent mind. She reset the shunt, preparing it for another attempt, but warned me that his brain needed to rest. We might only have one more chance, and it would have to count. Robert arrived within the hour, his face a perfect performance of concern. "What is it? What's happened?" he asked, rushing to my side as I stood by Leo's bed. I gestured to Elena. "This is Elena, one of Leo's caregivers. She's been trying something new, a form of sensory communication." Robert's eyes narrowed slightly. "Sensory? What does that mean? Is that approved by his medical team?" "It means," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "we think he can hear us." I turned to the bed, my back to Robert, but I was watching his reflection in the dark glass of a medical monitor. "Leo," I said, my voice filled with emotion I didn't have to fake. "I'm here. Robert is here. If you can hear me, Leo, just give us a sign. Anything." Of course, there was nothing. No movement, no sound. I saw Robert's shoulders relax in the reflection. He placed a sympathetic hand on my arm. "You need to rest," he said softly. "You're torturing yourself." "He's gone." "No," I said, turning to face him. "He's not." I looked at Elena and gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod. She had already affixed the shunt. Under the blanket, her hand held the phone. She pressed the screen. I held Robert's gaze. "I asked him, Robert. I asked him what happened that day. I asked him if his car was tampered with." A flicker of panic in his eyes. He tried to hide it, but I saw it. I had spent a lifetime reading men in boardrooms. I could read him like a prospectus. "That's insane," he stammered. "It was a tragic accident. The police confirmed it." "The police didn't have this," I said. Eleanor stepped forward, holding out the phone. On the screen, a single damning phrase was slowly, deliberately appearing letter by letter, pulled from the depths of my son's mind. "Brake line, fluid." Robert stared at the phone, his face draining of all color. He saw the impossible. He saw the voice of the boy he thought he'd silenced forever. The game was up. His composure shattered, and a sneer twisted his lips. He was going to ruin everything, he hissed. He was going to dissolve the trust, give it all away to his ridiculous charities. Years of work, my work, all for nothing. In that moment, everything I had built, all the control I craved, became focused on a single point. The man standing before me. I didn't need to raise my voice. I simply said, "You heard him." I glanced toward the ceiling, and so did they. A small red light glowed on a smoke detector. One of the microphones I'd installed to listen for my son had just become the star witness to a murderer's confession. Robert's eyes followed my gaze, and the last of his arrogance crumbled into pure, abject terror. Security flooded the room before he could even think to run. The days that followed were a blur of police, lawyers, and doctors. Robert's confession, recorded in crystal-clear high-definition audio, was ironclad. They found evidence of his transactions, his sabotage. He was a monster hiding in plain sight. But I barely paid attention to his downfall. All my focus was on Leo. With Dr. Varga Elena leading a new, lavishly funded research team, we learned to manage the shunt. We could only connect for a few minutes each day, but those minutes were everything. We talked. He told me about the accident, about the terror and the helplessness. He told me he could hear everything, that he'd been screaming inside for months. And I told him I was sorry I hadn't listened sooner. His body was still a prison, but now the door was open. His mind was free. The fight for his physical recovery would be long, perhaps impossible, but it was a fight we would now face together. My empire of control was an illusion, shattered by a random act of malice, but in its ruins, I found something real. It wasn't in the stock tickers or the surveillance systems. It was in the faint glow of a phone screen, in the courage of a disgraced doctor, and in the impossible, beautiful strength of a son who refused to disappear into the silence. He was still in there. And for the first time in a long time, so was I.